Hello, Jerry Conacher. Just want to welcome you now to this very thorough series we're doing on True Devotion to Mary, adopted by Eddie Doherty. It's really a beautiful book, and everyone should really be reading this. And we have with us the Montfort missionary, Father Hugh, Gillespie, and Father Bernard Geiger from the Franciscan Order, two very Marian priests, and this is a great series. And Father, we're now moving into chapter 7, which is getting at the heart of this true devotion now.
Yes, it is.
Yeah. So what are your insights?
Well, having just laid out for us the 5 bedrock principles he was going to build this on, and then opening our eyes to 7 errors that we could very easily find ourselves falling into.
Right.
Now Montfort's going to say, having done all of that, let's take a look at what true devotion is. Because his insistence is, granted that devotion to Mary is necessary, we want to get the right one.
Right.
And we want to make sure it's the best one. So what he proposes first is that if we're going to consider what a truly good and reliable devotion to Mary is, it should be distinguished by 5 characteristics.
Okay.
And so once again, just like he proposed 7 errors, which we could use in our own discernment to even gauge the quality of our spiritual lives, he's now proposing 5 characteristics which we can use in a similar way. These characteristics are: a true and authentic devotion to Mary must be interior, tender, holy, constant, and disinterested. And if it's missing any one of those things, it's something less than a true devotion to Mary. And that's a very valuable tool for discernment. The first mark, interior, which he gives us, if you remember when he was talking about the false forms of devotions, one of the great concerns in the first 2,
the exterior.
was that it would be merely exterior and be lacking depth. And Montfort says that's not what we're after. And so if that's your concern, that devotion to Mary is somehow lacking in substance and depth, let me put you at ease, because the devotion I'm proposing is one that must spring from the internal depths of the person. It has to well up from a genuine esteem and love for the Virgin Mother and her place in the plan of God, and a genuine desire to increase in the likeness of Jesus.
In that relationship where you're talking to Mary, that you're dealing with her in your interior life. She's present there.
And along with interiority, another word that we could use is deeply personal. Because one can't have an internal devotion without it being a personal devotion. This has to be my person, engaging the person of Mary and the person of Jesus.
And she knows us as a mother, like mothers know their children better than anyone.
Right. And that's why Montfort would say, as you've anticipated, the second mark is tenderness.
Yes.
Because the hallmark of a mother's love for a child and a child's affection for a mother is that same kind of tenderness, where one experiences a truly maternal presence, and one trusts that presence, and because of that trust and that gentleness of her presence, one responds with an equal gentleness, not simply begging to be converted or to be changed, but knowing that if I simply turn and ask, grace will be given to me. Holy, for the obvious reason that this is about growth, true, genuine growth in the spiritual life. And that just as a mother, not just by the things she does physically in terms of feeding, dressing, and carrying a child, but the manner in which she does it, she communicates something of her own gentleness, her own tenderness to the child. So too the Virgin Mother, who in the way she relates to us begins to communicate her own virtues, her own example, her own holiness to us, and allow us to participate, to experience that, and then to experience the even deeper and even greater holiness of Jesus himself. And so this notion of holiness, however, is really important for Montfort, because here the rubber meets the road. And Montfort says, being internal is good. Being tender is wonderful, but it needs to transform the heart. And that's the key point of holiness. Holiness means that I'm also rooting out the sources of my sinfulness. I'm also looking to grow in virtue. Fourth, constant. And again, this is a big deal for Montfort. It's not a devotion he wants us to rush into with great enthusiasm, only to become exhausted and turn away. But that this is something that we settle into for the long haul of our lives. And that it's not a matter of how many strong and great experiences I have, but how steady my growth in this relationship is, just like in a marriage or a true friendship. What really matters is the day-to-day faithfulness of two people who share and experience life together. And there may be high moments or low moments, but the key is the fidelity which sees one through.
And in 33 days, I don't know of another consecration that takes that long, you know, so to prepare you for that, yes.
Right. Probably the closest analogy would be the long period of the spiritual exercises, which the Jesuits do.
Right, right.
But it's certainly just even saying to prepare yourself, you have to set aside a month of time, is insisting that you begin growing into that constancy even at the outset of the devotion.
Beautiful.
Finally, he says it's disinterested. Montfort's great motto, which he signed his letters and proclaimed time and time again, was God alone. God alone. Only God and His glory is what interests me. Not my glory, not my needs, not my own advantage, but the spreading of the kingdom. And Montfort says, if this is going to be a true devotion to Mary, a true way of growing into the likeness of Jesus, I need to learn to set aside my desire to control and determine every action that I'm doing and truly place it at the service of the kingdom.
So that disinterested is not thinking of oneself, always thinking of God, not how it's going to impact on me.
Right. There was a spiritual writer who once talked about growth in love. And he said that we all begin by loving ourselves. We start there. And then we become a little bit more mature and we begin to love God for what God has done for us. We're not solely focused on ourselves, but it's because of ourselves that we turn to God. And Montfort says, you know, that's a real movement, but we want to go beyond that. And so a third movement in love would be to say, I love God for who God is in Himself. And Montfort is more interested in that level and even a level beyond that, which says, in the end, I love myself because of God. That when I've truly turned to God, I can truly appreciate who I am and my own life. Because I'm no longer the focus, but when God is the focus, I can truly see myself and everyone else for who we really are.
That's beautiful. Father Bernard, what are your insights there?
I'm drinking it all in.
That's beautiful, isn't it?
Right.
Young priest has got a lot to him.
Yes. Well, he's come through a lot too.
Yeah.
But yes, that whole idea of being disinterested doesn't mean you don't have any interest at all. It means that God is now our interest, that we have become aware that He loves us, and we've started to believe that. And the more you believe something, the more you act on what you believe. And the more I believe God loves me, the more I'm going to start paradoxically shifting my focus from me to Him. In other words, if He loves me so much, that means He has a tremendous plan in mind. And not only for me, but for all His creation. And that plan is so wonderful, I want to find out what that is. And I want to start responding to that so that I'm starting to love Him in return. And that's where the real changes start to take place, because when we start to love God, we are like giving permission to God, to His love, to start transforming us the way He wants to. And of course, as I have mentioned before, when Jesus prayed at the Last Supper, that all would be one as He and the Father are one, that we all would be one in Him and in the Father. The first person He wants us to be one with is His Blessed Mother. Because that's who He is. She's the first one He really became one with in the way that He wanted to become with all of His creation. And so He's going to bring me to her. And I'm going to really start responding, beginning to know her love through Him if I start to know his love, then I begin to realize, well, she loves me too. Why? Well, because he does. And therefore, and since he wants me to be one with her, then I want to get to know her, and I want to be totally given to her like he was, so that she can start transforming me into that member of his mystical body that Jesus wants me to be.
So it's an imitation of Christ, really.
Yeah, and it's even more than imitation. It's a process of identification, becoming one with him, becoming the same. Comes from the Latin word idem, which means the same. I want to be identified with Christ. I want to be one being with him, or he wants to be one being with me. And I start to buy into that and say, yes, I want that too.
That's good. Father, what are your...
Well, it's very remarkable after laying out this set of 5 characteristics and describing the person, the soul that would really appropriate these. Montfort just comes to a halt again, and he pauses in wonder and says, how pleasing, how precious to Mary and to God is such a soul. Then he has a footnote, and how rare.
Right.
And it's one of the wonderful things when one reads Montfort is he comes up short every now and then and slams the brakes on really hard with a reality check.
Yeah. He's easy to read.
Yes, he is.
Yeah, he's easy to read.
And he says, these are the 5 marks, but let's not fool ourselves and think that we have them at any given time.
Right.
And that it really is a truly difficult labor to appropriate those and to make them a continual part of our lives. So again, Montfort has no illusion. Montfort, and he goes on at great length now in the succeeding paragraphs to talk about, in writing this book, it's my hope that it falls into the hands of someone who'll just give this a shot.
Right.
And I see that many will pick it up and read it, and that there are some who will hide it and bury it. But if just one person picks this up and finds something of what I have to say and begins walking in this way, then it's worth it.
Right.
And one gets a sense here of the man himself who is so caught up in what he wants to share, that sharing this way, sharing this spirituality, this is a deeply personal text for Montfort, and one can't help but experience the man as one reads it. And it's almost as if he's praying for us as we read the book, because there's so much here of his desire that we can penetrate through the haze of our sinfulness and reach the heart of this wonderful, wonderful spirituality and begin to make it our own. After that, toward the end of this section, Montfort says, now there are 5 characteristics, but there are also a number of practices that come with a true devotion to Mary. And this is really important, because Montfort is not a man who dwells merely in the abstract. Montfort will insist on a number of internal characteristics for his devotion, but he's also going to say there are external things that are important. They're not insignificant. Obviously, without the internal marks, the practices are meaningless.
Yes.
But for Montfort, it's the practices that allow us to express what we carry inside, to give public witness, but also he recognizes at times it's in acting externally that we deepen ourselves internally.
Right.
And so he's also going to say, I'm not afraid of the external because it's necessary.
It's like posture for prayer.
Exactly, exactly. There has to be, at some point, a visible manifestation of what goes on inside of me, or else I have to question its reality. And so Montfort says there are hundreds of them, but here are the most important. Obviously, we honor Mary as the Mother of God. We esteem her above all others as the masterpiece of grace and the first in greatness after Jesus Christ. And so Montfort is going to say there has to be some kind of external honor we give to Mary. Whether it's praying in front of her altars, marking her feast days, but our prayer and our being is somehow marked with a desire to honor this woman. Second, he says we meditate on her virtues, her privileges, and her actions, and that we don't just content ourselves with abstract sentiments and some imagined feeling of maternal love, but that we engage the woman herself, that we concretely set time and prayerful energy aside to make her the center and to say,
Yes.
let me reflect upon this person. Let me come to know this person. Now, this can be done without my showing anything externally, but Montfort is insisting you need to take the time to do it.
Yeah.
Contemplating her splendors the same way. Offering her acts of love, praise, and thanks. Montfort is insisting that this has to become a real personal relationship.
Right. To talk to her.
Exactly. Exactly. Where real gratitude is shown. Where real demonstrations of affection are made. And fifth, invoking her aid with one's whole heart. Now notice Montfort says this devotion is disinterested. But he doesn't say that doesn't mean you can never ask for help.
Right.
He says, if all you're doing is asking for help, then we have a problem.
Right.
But the humble heart also recognizes that we do not sustain ourselves in sanctity by our own efforts alone.
Right.
We need the aid and the support of Mary, of Jesus, of the saints, of the good example of our friends.
Yeah.
And so, again, we confidently allow our heart to say, I really need your help here, knowing that we'll receive it. Six, offering oneself to her and uniting oneself to her. Doing everything with the object of pleasing her, and to begin, continue, and finish each action through her, in her, with her, and for her, that we may do them through Jesus, in Jesus, and with Jesus. Now, if someone said, okay, you've told me that true devotion has to be interior, constant, disinterested,
Right.
holy, what does that look like? And tender, what does that look like? Draw me a picture. Montfort does that right here.
Right.
This is what I mean. These are how those 5 dispositions must come together.
That's why he's so practical. I mean,
Yes.
he is. He's very
Yeah.
practical.
He's not going to say it has to be internal and then say you figure it out.
Right.
He's going to say whatever it's going to look like in you, these are the building blocks. Obviously, you'll put them together differently than I will or somebody else will, but these are the building blocks.
Right.
And then next to these are the more obviously external practices. One enrolls oneself in Mary's confraternities and joins her congregations.
Right.
One enters a religious order instituted in her honor. Now, obviously, not everybody will do that. But Montfort is saying, like looks for like.
Yes.
One seeks to find that external support and that external fellowship which makes living this spirituality possible. Proclaiming her praises outwardly. Fasting, giving alms, and denying oneself in her honor. For Montfort, mortification is an essential element of the spiritual life. This aspect of self-denial is a non-negotiable for him, but always with a point. It's never fasting for the sake of fasting,
Right.
never almsgiving for the sake of almsgiving, never mortification just because I want to feel miserable, but for the sake of negating myself, of setting myself aside so that I can make room in my life for Mary to move, for Jesus to enter, for
Right.
myself to be formed.
That's not very popular today.
Oh, mortification was never really very popular.
That's right.
We read that and our heart gets timid very quickly.
Right.
But this is really a key notion. There's a matter of really setting aside myself and recognizing that if I truly want God to enter my life, I need to make space.
Yes.
And that means I need to say no to some corner of my heart, to some aspect of my life. And maybe I can't say no to everything at once.
Right.
But if I never say no to anything, I'm never going to make any room.
Fasting from television would be very hard today. People are addicted to it.
From television, the internet,
Internet.
or one had all those stories when the BlackBerry service went down.
Yeah. It
And
was.
folks were finding themselves every 10 minutes checking their device to see if it still worked.
Yeah, right.
And our desire to be busy and distracted keeps us shallow. And when we have that, we're afraid of genuine depth and
Right.
genuine silence. And Montfort's insisting, you're not going to grow spiritually if you allow yourself to drift. That's that kind of external danger that he spoke about earlier. And it's not just external practices of piety, but I can have a spiritual life which allows me to simply indulge and drift rootlessly from distraction to distraction to distraction.
Right.
And Montfort says, no, those things are good, but they have their place, and
So
they
quiet.
need to be set aside.
So quiet time. And
Right.
you can have, interesting with Father Von Kamm and Susan Muto, they were talking about modern day today. You can still have quiet time, right, in your own car as you're driving, and or you're on a train. I mean, noise all around you, but you are focusing and you're dialoguing and you're just shutting other things down and allowing God to come in.
Right.
Can happen in the modern. Some people say, "Well, I can't get to a church." I know some people commute 2 or 3 hours one way, 3 hours another way, and then they work. You know, it's but during that commute time could be great time for developing the interior life.
Right. And the curious thing is, with that form of self-denial, it's really a matter of reappropriating one's life.
Right.
Because so many things take over our lives, and we end up losing our lives.
Right.
And it's not until we set them down that we realize there's more to my person
Yes.
than those things were. But because we get so caught up in defining ourselves around them, it becomes that much harder to put them down.
Right.
You know, and in active ministry, it's not just a matter of people who are misusing their spare time. In the desire to serve the church, to serve the gospel, and Pope Benedict had just spoken about the heresy of an overworked minister, of sometimes our own generosity in the service of the gospel gets in our way.
Yes.
And we never stop to renew ourselves. And in a subtle way, we mistake ourselves for God. Because only God has limitless energy. Only God can meet every need. I can't.
Right.
Although I act on any given day as if that was me.
Right.
And the need to pull back and to say, as important as the work is, as important as the ministry is, those are not the be-all and the end-all either.
Right.
My relationship with the living God, that is the most important.
We try to talk about the grace of the present moment and living that consecration so that we, as we work through our day, holiness is God's will, and God has a providential plan for every moment of our day. So when we get up in the morning and make our act of consecration, we have to realize that God has a plan for that day. Am I going to be open to that plan, or am I going to be doing what I want to do? And that's where we've entered a practice of just saying the 2 words, all four, every time you have to make a decision, because you're making hundreds of decisions throughout the week. I mean, picking up phones, meetings, everything. So every time something comes up, you say all four. By all four, we're saying we want to make a spiritual communion, because that's a reality, to receive the grace, to discern and do your will at this moment. All four of the sacred and Eucharistic heart of Jesus, but all through the sorrowful and immaculate heart of Mary, who takes it, purifies it, multiplies it, puts it into the world, all in union with St. Joseph, who's the perfect model of true devotion, because he lived it. And it's transformed a lot of lives. I have one doctor in Aurora, he said, just turn my life inside out. He said, I'm making decisions all the time at the hospital, at home, and every time I have to make a decision, I just pause to say all four, and it brings me into God's presence. And I know I'm making a spiritual communion because that's a reality, and I'm receiving grace to discern and do. But it's doing it through this consecration. So this is how we're trying to tell people how they can live this consecration in a practical way. We'll run out of time, but this is great. I tell you, this program is moving so rapidly, but I just pray that you will get this book by Eddie Doherty, True Devotion to Mary. The De Montfort Fathers put it out. And it's just, it's easy. It's an easy read, and this will introduce this entire spirituality that will turn your life around and really give you a union with God that is so dear, and it will change and transform your whole family life as well. So thank you for joining us. Go to our website, learn how you can make this consecration, familyland.org. God bless you.